As agonizing as it was to watch the Houston Cougars fall short against the Florida Gators last night, I think we have all seen what the game plan will be and what Kevin Young needs to accomplish if he wants to lead BYU to the top.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. And of course, thank you to all of you who are everydayers with us right here on your original daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. All right, brutal scenes last night for our Big 12 brethren in the Houston Cougars as they faltered down the stretch, especially in the final 5-ish minutes, and come up short yet again. Houston has made, I think, is it 7 Final Fours and has never won a national championship. You want to talk about BYU having never made a Final Four? Imagine making it to the proverbial mountaintop, but never making it to the summit. That's the tough part for the Houston Cougars. But the bigger point I want to talk about today is what BYU needs to do to claw their way to the top if they hope to do so under Kevin Young. We'll also talk a little BYU football. Big news yesterday with Brock Harris committing to the BYU football program. We'll talk about that and the impact it could have, a cascading effect, hopefully, for BYU football. And then we'll catch up with the guy who figures to be the star tight end for BYU this season in Carsen Ryan. All right, so tough loss, obviously, for Houston last night, but Florida and Houston, I think, showed exactly what BYU needs to have on their roster if Kevin Young wants to accomplish what I believe he wants to accomplish with the BYU basketball program, and that is making a Final Four, and that is winning a national championship. Sure, you need premier players, and AJ Dybantsa is absolutely one of those guys. He comes into this BYU basketball program. He's enrolling later this month on April 29th to get started with summer workouts and the like. Richie Saunders, we're still awaiting word on what his future is going to hold. I expect him at this juncture to return to BYU. I could be dead wrong about that take, and it feels like 20 minutes time, but we're also still awaiting Jaeger Demon's decision. Now, that'll be coming later this morning for many of you watching and or listening to this podcast. 10 a.m. Mountain Time. This podcast goes out at 5 a.m. Mountain Time, so about a 5-hour difference, and we'll have full reaction to whatever Jaeger Demon decides to do. But even with those three potentially returning for BYU, there are still absolute needs for Kevin Young to target, whether it's via the European or overseas route, via the transfer portal, etc. What are those? Well, watch the final 5 minutes of that game. Yes, I know the offense was pretty brutal for both teams, but you have to credit the defensive effort for the Florida Gators and the Houston Cougars last night. They were absolutely nails. Just disrupting shots, getting out, closing out on shooters. They made it near impossible for either team to really generate much, if any, offense, and good looks were hard to come by. That's something BYU needs to be able to discover, and what that's going to require is a higher level of athlete across the board than BYU had on their roster last year. I love me some Trevin now. I love what BYU had with Mawit Mag, but you need 4, maybe 5 Mawit Mags, if not maybe even better than Mawit Mag, to really succeed at the level that Houston and Florida showed us on the court. It is an elite level of athlete is able to close out to the level that those teams did, but also have the big men who are capable of stepping out when need be, but also be able to retreat into the paint, recover enough to disrupt shots at the rim. Keba Keita is absolutely awesome, but Xavier Staten, everything I've seen from him from Utah Prep indicates to me he's going to need probably a year to really develop into the force that BYU hopes he can become. Mihailo Boskovic, he does his best, but I don't consider him to be a rim defender. So BYU needs to find some big men in the same caliber of what Keba Keita offers, and quite frankly, they need to find a 6'11", 7 foot or taller big man, because Keba, the one thing that can overwhelm him at times is he stands 6'8". He has got prodigious hops. He's an incredibly freakish athlete, but BYU needs some true, what you call trees in the middle of that lineup. So yes, I think what BYU has right now is, yes, they have the offense, at least the firepower. I believe that they can generate enough to win a national championship. But as we often hear, Defense wins championships. And I don't believe BYU's defense this past season, nor right now with the way the roster is currently constituted, is anywhere near where it needs to be if BYU really wants to snap that streak of having that inglorious mark of being the most NCAA tournament appearances as a basketball program without a Final Four appearance. Yes, it's agony for Houston to have come up short, but they have made it to 7 Final Fours. BYU's never even been there, and I think what it's going to take is to be able to defend at a really, really high, if not an elite level, if they want to accomplish that. I trust that Kevin Young will generate offense. He'll generate looks with the talented players he has offensively. AJ Dybantsa, for everything he is offensively, I can assure you, he will put in work on the defensive side of the basketball. And Richie Saunders, one of his calling cards early on in his career was the fact that he was a defensive force for BYU. Those two are just two guys. Can Dominic Diomande be that defensive stopper that Mawit Mag was this past year? Let's say BYU picks up a guy like Makai Mason, who we talked about also from Washington. He hasn't announced where he's going to go yet, but BYU reportedly is interested in him. He shot 40% from three, but at 6'5", 195, you hope he's got the defensive chops as well to be able to defend his position, especially with the spacing that BYU wants in their program. You got to be able to use the term guard your yard, and that's what BYU needs to discover. So I don't worry about BYU's offensive capabilities in terms of potentially running to a Final Four and, heck, maybe winning a national championship someday. But truthfully, if BYU wants to win it all, they want to be that team that is hoisting the trophy. The one shining moment has them at the end hoisting that trophy. They've got to be better, if not downright elite defensively, and I think that's going to take time. Could it be accomplished this year? Sure. There's still time in the transfer portal. There's still time to target guys in the overseas ranks to come in and fill those roles. But I think the game plan, the roadmap to what BYU hopes to accomplish under Kevin Young, it was right there for the watching in that national championship game, which, by the way, I'll just add this, really entertaining game overall. I thought I really was entertained by it. I sat back and just had a great time watching, but the more I watched it, the more I realized BYU, they have a dearth. I use the term dearth a lot and I get made fun of, but apparently it's dearth. Blame my Utah upbringing, but I call it dearth. But they have a dearth of talent on the defensive side of the basketball that I think will be the differentiator of BYU winning in March Madness, winning in the Final Four, winning a national title. All that is out there for the taking for BYU, but it has to get done on the defensive side of the court because I think BYU has the answers offensively. Can they find the answers defensively? That remains the question. All right, coming up next, flip over to BYU football. Big news for BYU. One of the biggest recruiting wins in well over 20 years for the BYU football program, if you believe recruiting rankings. Brock Harris is committed to the BYU football program. Can his commitment set off a cascading effect for a number of other top-level recruits that BYU is chasing in the 2026 cycle? We'll delve into that next right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Now, all of us want to get out to the events we want to go to, whether it's a big game, comedy event, no matter what you're into, our friends at Game Time have got the options for you guys. And the best part is there's nothing like taking in those live events and finding great seats that at the great price you want to pay. That used to be a challenge until you go with our friends over at Game Time. Game Time makes scoring last-minute tickets easier than ever. Prices actually drop as the event gets closer to starting. And with their all-in pricing feature, you see the total cost up front. No surprises at checkout with fees, etc. So obviously, we all want to pay an incredible rate to go and watch these games. You can grab last-minute tickets for whatever game your heart desires. You want to watch the Utah Jazz down the stretch here? You want to watch the Utah Hockey Club in their final few home games? You can do that with our friends over at Game Time. Take the guesswork out of buying your tickets and do it with our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app today. Create an account and use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that code is LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Hope y'all are doing well on this Tuesday. It's been a busy, it feels like already been like Wednesday at this point, but it's been a busy couple of days. But the BYU football program got a major recruiting win yesterday when Pineview High School tight end Brock Harris announced that he will be a BYU Cougar. Now, if you go by recruiting rankings, it is the biggest recruiting win for BYU in terms of a star-rated athlete since Ofa Mohetau. And those of you who know who Ofa Mohetau is, that is a deep cut. And you have been paying attention to BYU recruiting rankings literally since the early 2000s. Ofa Mohetau was a 5-star offensive lineman, for those of you not in the know, who committed to BYU as a 5-star offensive lineman out of Euless Trinity High School in Texas, but then never enrolled at BYU and played very lightly for a short time at Texas Tech and then really never emerged. I think he may have played in the Arena League for a short time, but he was a huge, huge recruiting win in the heyday under Gary Croton. If you want to call it a heyday, your description may differ, but regardless, huge recruiting win yesterday for Brock Harris as a bona fide 4-star prospect verging on 5-star territory to commit to BYU. I talked about him in a special edition. If you want to pause the podcast and go back and listen to that, feel free, and you can jump right back in here. But the bigger point to be made is Brock Harris is an elite athlete. I had a person that I talked to shortly after he announced his commitment that's inside the BYU football program who called him, quote, a freak. And they mean that in the best possible way. And they also added this later. Brock Harris could show up to BYU right now and start for us. Wow. Didn't expect that to come out of somebody's mouth inside the BYU football program, but that's what was sent to me. And that tells me everything I need to know about BYU and what they expect from Brock Harris down the line. Now, he has mission plans, TBD, if he goes right out of high school, or maybe he decides to run it back and play for a year for BYU before embarking on a mission. But regardless, BYU had a top-tier talent. Can his commitment to BYU, can that have the cascading effect and start to really help BYU reel in some of the top tier prospects they're chasing in this 2026 cycle? I've talked about it on this podcast, but the 2026 recruiting class with the connections of the top shelf athletes that are A, members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, B, have connections to BYU, a la a guy like Brock Harris, whose dad Todd played at BYU back in the day, so BYU legacies, and just see guys who are here regionally in the Intermountain West or in Big 12 territory that BYU's made inroads on in recruiting. If BYU can win some of these recruiting battles, they could put together potentially their best recruiting class literally ever. BYU had was it 24th or 25th in 2010 when the Jake Heaps class signed. Remember that Zach Stout, Ross Oppo, and the like. And that was a pretty highly thought of class. But BYU right now with the Brock Harris commitment is 36th in the early runnings of the 2026 recruiting cycle. So good spot to be in. If BYU wants to be a true force in the Big 12, if they truly want to be a Big 12 contender year in and year out, they've got to be top 30 at the very worst annually in recruiting rankings. So they're just outside of that right now. But this 2026 class has got, I'm telling you, top shelf talent that BYU is in on. I will echo some of what Jeff Hansen, our good friend of the podcast, go check out his work at givehimhellbrigham.com. It's an incredible website. It does a great job. He wrote a great piece yesterday talking about Brock Harris's commitment and what it could mean for BYU in the 2026 cycle. I'm going to quote from this, and he says this. As good as Harris is, and trust me when I say there is no underselling how good he really is, and I echo that, Brock Harris is absolutely elite. He might not even be the highest rated player to commit to BYU in the class of 2026. Sitake's staff, speaking of Kalani Sitake, has put BYU in a strong position for 5-star quarterback Ryder Lyons. We talked about that yesterday. Our friends at Locked On Ole Miss and Locked On the Portal believe that BYU's in the front runner seat for Ryder Lyons, and I have heard similar sentiments. Talanoa Ely, who is a 4-star linebacker prospect, has taken an unofficial visit to BYU. I'm getting back to Jeff's words here, and is scheduled to take an official visit next month. Those two are rated higher than Harris today. And like I said, Harris is already verging on 5-star territory. He also mentions this. BYU is also making a ton of progress with Bot Mulatalo out of Lone Peak High School here in Utah. Malachi Lee, one of the top-rated prospects. He might be the top-rated prospect out of Hawaii this year. Jaron and Kenan Pula out of Timpview High School, who are committed to UCLA, but are both really, really phenomenal athletes and potentially could flip. Kawe Akana from Orem High School, Jax Tanner out of Idaho, Braxton Lindsay. There is no shortage of and by the way, every one of these guys I've just mentioned are 4-star prospects. If not, the Pula brothers, they may be high 3-star territory, but I believe they're both 4 stars. These are the type of players that can take BYU from a middling program that they could pay off every few years with development of winning 11 games like they did this past season and push them in the territory where they are a perennial Big 12 contender. That is how important this 2026 recruiting class is for the BYU football program. They need to nail it. And getting Brock Harris, that is an incredible start. And that doesn't even preclude what they've already added. Ty Getchie, who's also a tight end prospect, he's a phenomenal athlete. He spurned other SEC and Big Ten offers to pick BYU. He is a member of the church from Cherry Creek, Colorado, and he picked BYU. You also mentioned Justice Brathwaite, his dad, Reynaldo. He's a BYU legacy. Justice had other Power 4 offers coming out of the Arizona prep ranks. BYU's done a really, really good job on the recruiting side of things right now for BYU football. And the funny thing is Nusi Taumoepeau, who are probably screaming at me, what about Nusi, Jake? Funny thing is, Nusi counts for the 2025 recruiting cycle. Yes, he had just signed with BYU, but he had signed with Stanford, and he's a member of this past recruiting class. Yeah, he's a bona fide 4-star prospect, a force off the edge, and should be an elite pass rusher for BYU. I love what BYU is doing right now in the recruiting sphere, and it's extending from BYU basketball to BYU football. And the nice part is it doesn't show any signs of stopping anytime soon. I sincerely hope BYU continues to capitalize on this 2026 class because the momentum they generated by going 11-2 last year cannot be overstated. It showed that BYU, just 2 years into their tenure as a Power 5 program, can compete amongst the big boys. There have been so many people out there who are naysayers saying that BYU feasted on lesser than schedules when they were in the independent era and back in the Mountain West and WAC days, and they simply put couldn't compete against a Power 5 type schedule. That was the parlance in the day. Now it's Power 4. Well, BYU just went 9-1, whatever it was against. No, it was 10. Regardless, they won a bunch of games against Power 5 opposition, 9 of them, if I recall correctly. And the nice part is they are poised to absolutely surpass that this year if everything goes according to plan. They bring back a ton of weapons from this year's team. And what helps recruiting more than anything else is showing you are a consistent winning program. That's what young men care about. Yes, BYU can crow about being QBU and go back through their pantheon of quarterback greats from the past 50 years. Yes, they can crow about the national championship in 1984, which is now 41 years in the rearview mirror. That doesn't necessarily apply to these young men who are 16, 17, 18 years old. They were born in the 20-aughts when BYU's had the likes of John Beck, Max Hall, Zach Wilson, Jaron Hall. They've had some really good quarterbacks, but consistent winning football programs at the highest level of football, which is what Jake Retzloff and BYU accomplished last year. If they can go out there and prove themselves once again on the biggest stage possible this coming season, who knows where this 2026 class could go for BYU, but it absolutely could be downright elite and, quite frankly, program changing for Kalani Sitake and the BYU Cougars. All right, a guy that, besides Brock Harris, because we don't know when Brock Harris will ultimately show up at BYU, it could be as soon as 2026. It could be as late as 2028, depending on his mission plans. A guy who figures to step into a more prominent role, and quite frankly, BYU needs him to be a star this coming season if they want to succeed at a high level, is Carsen Ryan. Yes, he played at UCLA. Yes, he played at Utah, and he's finally spending his final season playing for the BYU Cougars. What does he hope to accomplish in a BYU uniform as the hometown kid comes back home, quite literally, because he played at Timpview High School just up the road from BYU? What does he hope to accomplish in a Cougar uniform? He'll tell you next in an exclusive conversation right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Post District. I want you guys to go out and discover Post District, home to 4 of Salt Lake's newest and most stylish apartment buildings, The Register, Post House North, Post House South, and 801 Flats. Each one of these residences offers its own unique take on luxury urban living. Features like waterfall kitchen islands, floor-to-ceiling windows, vaulted ceilings, spacious patios, and most of all, as I think a lot of us care about, walk-in closets. Enjoy premium amenities, including the city's largest residential gym, a year-round pool, golf simulator, massive TV wall for sports watch parties, and more, all anchored in a one-of-a-kind community that surrounds you. You can step outside and find yourself immersed in Salt Lake's hottest dining and nightlife scene as well, with award-winning spots like Urban Hill, Mencho Ramen, Level Crossing, and Sunday's Best, literally steps away. So you can get everything you need and more with our friends over at Post District. Whether you're looking for a studio, 1, 2, or 3-bedroom apartment, or heck, even a penthouse, find your perfect home today. Visit liveatpost.com or call 801-590-6247. Mention this ad and mention Locked On Cougars for an exclusive incentive from our friends at Post District. But once again, go to visit not go to, visit liveatpost.com or call 801-590-6247 to get started today with our friends over at Post District. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Another plug for you guys if you have not done so already. Join the Locked On Cougars Insider Group and be in the know on all things BYU sports that I am hearing coming to your phone in the form of a text message. It does not get much more direct than that. You don't have to go to a message board or log on to a website to get the inside intel you crave. It comes in the form of a text message, and more importantly, you can have one-on-one conversations with myself via text as well. Ask questions and the like. So join us today. Link is in the show notes, whether you're watching this on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. It's just $5 a month to be a part of the Insiders Group. And the kicker is you get a full 2 weeks, 14 days before you are charged anything to see if it's the right option for you guys. So join us on the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. All right, we've talked a lot the last couple of days about tight end play for BYU. And going back to last week, had a great conversation, an exclusive conversation with BYU tight ends coach Kevin Gilbride. You can go back and listen to that and what he thinks of guys like Carsen Ryan as he leads BYU into the 2025 football season. Well, Carsen Ryan, why shouldn't he explain it in his own words? I had a great opportunity. BYU had an end of spring media availability last week, and I had a chance to sit down for an exclusive one-on-one conversation with Carsen Ryan to talk about what brought him to BYU, what he hopes to accomplish in a Cougar uniform, and quite frankly, why pick BYU when, last year the tight end wasn't targeted all that much. He explains all that and more, and we'll get to that right now, right here on Locked On Cougars.
I have a chance to talk to you about your transfer from Utah to BYU. Can you just kind of walk me through the whole process there?
Well, at a certain point in the season, I kind of decided that maybe I should think about entering the portal, and eventually I did at the end of the season and got in contact with BYU, and Coach Gilbride hit me up, and Coach Roderick, and we got talking. And early on, I had liked a lot of what they had been talking to me about and things that they'd offered me, with the offense and plans they said they had for me, and ways they envisioned using me. And so it really intrigued me about the school. And then when I took my visit, the way that things kind of meshed personally, like getting along with Coach Gilbride, Coach Roderick, Coach Kalani, like lots of great people, and lots of good football knowledge too there. And so that's kind of what really influenced me to come here. And then all the extra stuff too, like the connections you can make as a BYU alumni and opportunities we get off the field as well. So it just, I feel like it put me in a spot to be successful on and off the field, the best that I wanted to be, and it brought me close home to family too as well. And so it was a kind of a no-brainer for me.
Now, you talked about how they envisioned using you and what they planned for you. Through a month's worth of practices, how has it measured up?
I feel like it's been a great spring ball so far, for myself and for the team. And we got a lot of good things done offensively. We were able to throw the ball a lot and get the ball to a lot of different playmakers in the field, which is, I think, the goal with this team is to utilize everyone that we have, and because we have so much talent on the offense that we can beat teams many different ways. And I think that we've been able to showcase that this spring. We were able to run the ball very well, especially early on, and then we were able to start throwing the ball a lot too and get the ball to all of our wide receivers. And I was able to get the ball a lot and get into a lot of different pass concepts that I really liked, and liked practicing and learning, getting with Jake, and getting the timing down for those. And so I think the offense has a lot of potential this year to be really explosive and even better than what we were last year. And they were a great offense last year, and so I just want to be able to help get us to that next step and be even greater to get us to Big 12 championship and playoff appearance.
Now, production from the tight end position was a point of consternation for BYU fans last year because they're used to a strong tradition of tight ends being a big part of this offense. Do you envision that you and the rest of the guys in that room right now can make the tight end a weapon again? Yeah,
that's the goal. We want to, be the best players on the field as a tight end group, and we want to be able to be a reliable position. Someone that always knows what their job is, someone who can do that job, and when you're called upon, be able to be. We don't have to worry about that guy. He's going to do his thing. Like, we want to be that. We want that to be our role and someone they can rely on. So, we have a lot of big goals for the tight end room this year, and I think we'll be able to fill a lot of those.
You talk about run blocking. Obviously, that's a big part of playing tight end here. They require inline guys to be willing to do that. I remember watching you in high school. I've watched you at UCLA and also at Utah. You've been unafraid of putting your nose in there. Is that just a mentality? What causes you to be so willing to be a blocker?
Yeah, blocking is a big technique thing, and it starts off too, though, like you said, first mentality. Like, you got to be able to want to be in there, and you want to hit someone. Like, as a tight end, you're going against guys that are going to be bigger than you. And so you can't just be like, oh, I'm bigger, so I can just go and beat him up. Like, you got to want to go and fight that person. Like, you got to want to go and beat them up. And so, you know, it's always been a mentality thing for me. I love run blocking, and it's always been fun to me, you know, like physically dominating a person and, you know, putting them on their back, putting them in the ground, and, you know, making yourself the bigger man in that situation. So I've always enjoyed blocking, and, you know, as I've gotten older and more into college, and now I focus more on my technique, especially in how much I've had to rely upon that too, is when you get to the higher levels of college sports and then eventually the pros, like, you gotta, like I said earlier, you're smaller, so you gotta really hone in that technique, and that's gonna make up for your lack of size and strength compared to other defensive linemen. So, you know, but yeah, like you said, it's a mentality thing, and you gotta come in wanting to hit someone.
What's it been like working with Coach Gilbride?
Oh, it's been really good. I like his coaching style. I feel like he holds us to a high standard. He expects us to perform at a high level, and, you know, he's always out there. He's coaching us every step of the way, like every drill. Like, nothing's too small. He always points it out. Like, got to get your hips through a little more here. Get your step a little flatter. Don't round as much. Like, you know, small. He's always like looking at small details, and I feel like that's really helped me hone my technique. Just these few weeks I've been working with him, and I've enjoyed it a lot. And I feel like the more I can get to work with him this off season, I feel like I'll be able to take my technique to that next step to help me become an even better blocker. And, you know, that's a goal of mine, just to help clean up some of my technique issues, and I feel like I've been able to take a big step towards that this spring. And, you know, he's a great coach to do that because he's had so much experience in the NFL level and even college level, and so he's been around. He knows how to get things done. So,
Talking about wanting to be a better blocker, what are your other goals for the off season?
Just getting my speed a little faster, and I feel like I was able to show that a little bit this spring. I had some athleticism and pass catching, and, you know, my goal, I feel like I've been a pretty decent blocker in college, and my goal is to take that level of blocking and be able to match my pass catching ability with that, because, you know, my goal is to get to the next level in the NFL, and I feel like if I can get that skill set just as high as my blocking and get my blocking even higher, I can have a good chance at the next level. So it's, yeah.
There you have it, Carsen Ryan, BYU tight end. A big thank you to him for taking the time to sit down with me. And I will be very blunt. If Carsen Ryan can succeed and make tight ends great again at BYU, he will have accomplished something really, really special. I've had a number of you lately, and going back to my podcast yesterday, a special edition we did on Brock Harris, saying, well, it would only help if BYU throws them the football. Okay. I've heard this iterated on social media, and I will reiterate it here. The simple fact of the matter is, if you look at the Big 12 Pro Day numbers for BYU's tight ends, I'm talking Keanu Hill, Ray Paulo, the guy, Mata'awa Ta'ase. When BYU has offensive linemen who are running as, if not faster, than those same tight ends, good luck to them getting open. And that simply was the fact of life for BYU's tight ends last year. They did not have a difference maker at tight end. The hope was that Keanu Hill would be that as he made the transition from wide receiver. Nope. Mata'awa Ta'ase had a couple of moments, but never was a consistent weapon for the BYU football program. Ray Paulo, same deal. Carsen Ryan has shown at UCLA and obviously at Utah this past year that he can produce at a pretty decent level. He will need to take it to a higher level. And yes, Ethan Erickson alongside him and maybe a Noah Moiaki, et cetera, can emerge in his shadow and help be that flanking option to him at tight end. But BYU needs Carsen Ryan to absolutely nail his only season in a Cougar uniform. And you can tell he is supremely motivated. Now, he's got an incredible mane of hair, and that mustache is absolutely illustrious. If you're listening to this in the audio format, go to YouTube. Make sure you subscribe while you're there, by the way, and watch the interview and enjoy the mane of hair that Carsen Ryan is rocking right now. And the mustache, I'm telling you, it is regal. But nonetheless, he needs to go out there and be the weapon that BYU hopes he can be. And I know that I only saw, let's say, a grand total of maybe 2 hours of BYU spring camp, all told, with the media availability and the media sessions. I guess we got to watch a little bit of practice. But I'm telling you, Carsen Ryan flashed a lot in those sessions. Same with a guy like Keelan Marion. BYU needs options to step up opposite of Chase Roberts, Darius Lasser out of the program now. And yes, the wide receiving core is going to remain a strength for BYU. I think JoJo Phillips, Parker Kingston, Emmanuel Layla Waller, all these guys have options, but the tight end has always been a key differentiator for great BYU football teams. And much like top shelf quarterbacks, when BYU is top shelf tight end play, it obviously elevates them to another level. And that's what I'm sincerely hoping that Carsen Ryan can offer to the BYU football program. All right, that'll do it for this edition of Locked On Cougars. As always, please continue to subscribe, rate, review, share this with your family and friends, and help this community grow larger and larger and larger. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. And once again, thank you for being everydayers right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.